Hey guys, Tom Barclay here. Just doing my review from Ange Postecoglou's press conference, previewing the massive semi-final second leg against Bodo Glimt here out in the Arctic Circle up in Norway. I'm just in my hotel room, as you can tell, at the moment. Just before I get into it, this is something that seems to crop up most European games, away trips, to be honest, for Spurs. But again, last night there were some fireworks let off outside the Spurs' hotel by some sort of cheeky home fans, presumably, about 2:30 in the morning, to try and disrupt their sleep, presumably ahead of the big game. It's something that's happened before. We had it at Hoffenheim earlier this season. I remember it in Marseille in the Champions League back in 2022. So, not an uncommon thing at all, but fingers crossed it didn't disrupt the players' sleep too much ahead of what is a big game tonight. So to get into Ange's press conference, I mean, there's various things, and obviously Vicario was up as well. The sort of big headline grabber, particularly for the Nationals, and the most quotable part of Ange's presser was when he was asked about Arsene Wenger's comments, somewhat controversial comments, particularly with the Tottenham fan base, particularly coming from an Arsenal icon, as is Wenger, about his suggestion that the winners of the Europa League should not be allowed to go straight to qualify for the Champions League, that they should qualify instead for the Europa League again, and he feels like it shouldn't be that way, which was never going to go down well, was it, with the Spurs fan base in particular, Man United as well, given that those two sides are at least at the moment on course to face each other in the final, presuming Spurs can obviously get through here against Bodo, which looks a lot less of a sure thing than it does for Man United with their 3-0 aggregate score going into a home game against Bilbao. But obviously we'll come on to Spurs' chances in a minute. Ange said, in quite a funny response about that question, he said, Tottenham makes you crazy, makes people crazy, say crazy things effectively. He said he had a lot of respect for Arsene Wenger, who's a legend of the game. But he sort of talked about how this has never been a thing, even a debate until this season. Why is it coming up now? These are the rules. Just in the same way that the rules last season, he made the point that, and he's made this a few times actually, that obviously last season's Spurs finished fifth, but didn't qualify for the Champions League. Whereas this season, fifth place does qualify for the Champions League, which is a point actually he's referenced quite a bit recently. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue with it, really. He makes a good point. I think Wenger's making a sort of wider point, like, maybe going forward, that he thinks it shouldn't qualify like that, that team shouldn't qualify for the Champions League, but obviously that was never going to change at this point. And did he have to say it now? It does feel like it's sort of slightly baiting the Spurs fan base, but there you go. But it was quite a funny response from Ange. He did confirm that James Maddison is going to miss the rest of the season, which is something that we half expected. Now, I'm led to believe, and there have obviously been lots of other reports, that he's going to be out for probably about 3 months with this knee injury. I believe it's a medial ligament injury in his knee. I actually was told that they were worried at first that it might even be an ACL. So if anything, it's maybe not quite as bad as first feared, but it's obviously a major injury. And you think, looking at the timeline, see as it's May now, 3 months takes you to August, he'd probably be in a bit of a race to be fit for the start of the season, which is a huge blow because he's been so good in the last few months, really, or the last 6 weeks. He's someone that I've been critical of myself, given his numbers have always been quite good, but I don't think that the numbers have really reflected how he's performed and how much he's really taken games by the scruff of the neck for a player of his talent. But generally in the last sort of year or so, but I would say over the last 6 weeks he very much has. He put his body on the line out in Frankfurt to win that penalty, which was admirable, and then was very, very good in the first leg against Bodo, where obviously he scored, but he just really felt like he was coming to the fore and stepping up when Spurs really needed him. So to have him be injured and for such a long time is a hammer blow. And as I said the other day, it feels like with Bergvall injured as well, it really is down to Kulusevski to sort of to provide that creative spark in the middle for Spurs if they are to go all the way in Europe this season, because without him, they don't really have another player like that. And if anything, Kulusevski is obviously a different kind of player to Maddison, but he can make things happen and he can create in a different way. And he himself has been quite rusty since coming back from his own foot injury, but Spurs need him to sort of step it up quite quickly now. And I did actually ask Ange about Kulusevski, and he kind of referenced all those sort of points as well. Sonny as well, obviously he's not here. Not a huge surprise, given that he obviously has been struggling with his foot injury. And he's out. He's not made the trip again. Ange did sort of suggest that he was pushing to maybe involved at the weekend against Crystal Palace. So fingers crossed, if Spurs do get through against Bodo, he will be in a position to potentially play the final. But yeah, still not here either. But Solanke is fit and he's ready to go, so that's a big big boost for Spurs on that front. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about the pitch, plastic pitch. I mean, I did a video yesterday, literally looking at the plastic pitch when I went to see Buddha's open training, which you haven't seen, go and check out. What's interesting about the pitch is after the first leg, Kulusevski, who's played a lot of artificial surfaces, some of the Norwegian journalists were telling me they spoke to Kulusevski in the mix zone after the game, and Kulusevski had been talking about how much slower the artificial surfaces generally play compared to grass. And they were a bit confused because everyone here, including some of Bodo's players, have talked about how much quicker the pitch plays. Their pitch compared to grass, and that's the big thing about it. They water the pitch quite a lot, so you expect that. I mean, right now I think it's quite overcast outside right this morning, but it might be raining later. But imagine they'll water the pitch, and that could be something that Spurs really have to get to grips with how quickly the ball moves. But obviously there's been a lot made about this pitch and how Spurs are going to cope with it, given the amount of teams that have been beaten at home on this ground. Where you rock up to it, and when the clouds come over and mask the snow-capped mountains in the background, you could definitely be forgiven for thinking you were rocking up to a League Two ground. I mean, I've been to a lot of League Two games over the years when I used to be covering the Football League, and the stadium itself, like it doesn't look much different, and if anything, it looks one of the lower end League Two grounds. To be honest, it's the most open ground apparently, or one of the most open grounds in Europe, or one of the coldest grounds in Europe. Every single corner is completely open to the elements. When it is a windy game, we'll whip around the stadium. The stands themselves aren't very big. I believe the capacity is 8,270, if I got that right off the top of my head. 404 fans. Spurs allocation are due to be here, although I heard one fan got denied entry because his passport had been had expired, so I guess that makes it more like 403. So it's going to be a small, tight ground, compact atmosphere, but that's one that other teams have struggled with. You know, the likes of Olympiacos, Porto, FC Twente, Lazio in the last round. I mean, the list is really endless of sort of European big names that have come a cropper here. So Spurs are going to have to avoid being in that situation and deal with the pitch. And whilst someone like Kulusevski is quite used to playing on artificial surfaces growing up, I can't say the same for everybody else. I mean, Vicario was asked about the pitch yesterday, and he was saying you can't make any excuses about it. You know, other teams have played here, and it's just the way it is. But he did admit the last time he'd played personally on a plastic pitch was 5 years ago. Remember, he was injured when Spurs played in Tamworth in January in the FA Cup on their artificial surface. Interesting, I didn't realise, but when Ange came here with Celtic 3 years ago and obviously lost, he decided not to train on the pitch the day before, apparently. But that was different this time. Whilst he didn't train on the artificial surface back at Spurs' training ground, in the build-up to this game, which in itself seems to be quite an interesting decision. They did obviously train last night on the artificial surface, so hopefully they've got to grips to a certain extent with it ahead of the game. Another thing that came up, I was at the because I came out here a day earlier than quite a lot of the other journalists, and so I made it to the Bodo press conference as well as the open training, and I completely sort of not really noticed this as a talking point. Maybe some of you guys had seen it, but I didn't see it really get picked up in England. But basically, there was a bit of a hoo-ha about one of the comments made by one of the Bodo defenders about Tottenham's pressing in the immediate aftermath after the first leg. It was a defender, I'm going to get the pronunciation of his name completely wrong, so forgive me. It's Frederick Schovold. And basically he was asked about Spurs' pressing in the first game, and he described it as raver. Again, I may have mispronounced that, which politely translated is basically bad or very bad. There is a sort of slightly more offensive word you could use as a translation. But anyway, he referencing Spurs' pressing in the first game. This got picked up quite a lot by the Norwegian press, to the point where the manager yesterday, Kjetil Knutsen, again I'm sure I've mispronounced that, was asked about it, and I followed up on it because I could sense this was quite an interesting talking point amongst the Norwegian fan base. I actually ended up asking a question about it to their midfielder, who was also up for the press conference, Jens Petter Hauge, if I pronounced that right again, who formerly was actually of AC Milan and won the Europa League with Frankfurt, having left Bodo and has now come back. Anyway, the point, it was interesting. Like, it feels like it's been quite a talking point here. And I was even interviewed by the local TV here about it and asked whether it's been a big talking point back in England, which I had to admit, like, no, it hasn't been at all. What's strange about it is, for someone who watches Tottenham all the time, and you guys who are fans, obviously watching all the games, it was a noticeable choice, it felt like, from Spurs to sit off the Bodo team in the game. And obviously they're famed for their high press and how at the start of this season their numbers were as good as anyone in Europe, if not better than everyone, for their intensity of their pressing game. But the way the season's gone, the injuries they've sustained, or whether it's just the fact that they felt this was the right tactic to play against Bodo, and admittedly they did win 3-1, so it seemed to work. They seemed to be happy to sit off them and not press as hard. So it's kind of strange to hear, so even though, if you thought they were going to press hard, then it might have seemed like their pressing game was weak, as the the Bodo defender had suggested. I think it was quite clear that was, as I say, a choice that they made intentionally, Tottenham. But anyway, both Ange and Vicario were asked about this comment, and they both sort of played it down. And the best sort of response, I suppose, was Vicario saying, it's fine for him to say that, but we're going to let our football do the talking basically on the pitch. So I guess if it has been a source of extra motivation, the classic pin these comments up on the dressing room wall, to try and give them any extra motivation, then they weren't revealing any of that in the press conference. And anyway, the opportunity to get through to a first major European final for Tottenham since the Champions League final in 2019, and obviously a chance to win this competition for the first time since 1984, or have a chance of winning one, should be motivation enough, you'd think. And just on that note, I mean, it's actually 6 years to the day that they played that famous Ajax second leg to make that Champions League final, where they also wore green as they will be wearing tonight. So hopefully that's an omen from Spurs' perspective. So just finally looking at the game itself, obviously Bodo have, as I've referenced, a tremendous home record. They've got some key players back. Obviously their captain Patrick Berg was suspended for the first leg, one of 3 players suspended who are all back for this game. So that is going to be that's going to be a big challenge, obviously. It looks like their centre-back, Odin Bjørfoot, is probably going to be injured again, which is a blow for Bodo, because he's a key player. He missed the first leg with an injury, and yesterday he was training on his own. The sense was he probably would miss out. He might be on the bench. He was actually on the bench for the first leg, but That will hopefully be a boost from Spurs' perspective. I think looking at the likely starting 11, he definitely seems to have gone back to his preferred back four, with obviously Vicario, and I imagine it'll be the same with Porro, Romero, Van de Ven, Udogie. Then in midfield, I mean, you've got to presume it will be Basuma again after his performance last time out. And then Bentancur and Kulusevski. There aren't really many other options, to be honest, with all the injuries. And it doesn't feel like Pape Sarr is really in the mix at the moment to start. So those are the three that I would expect. The most sort of questionable positions are out wide, really. I would have thought it'd be Johnson again, even though Odegaard scored at the weekend. I think Johnson will probably start wide right. It seems to be at this stage, his preferred option out there. Solanke presumably starts through the middle. And then I imagine it will be Richarlison. I mean, obviously, Tal's been playing well, been pushing, but it felt like Richarlison did very well in the first half that he played against Bodo in the first leg. I suppose the only question is, with the plastic pitch and his questionable, obviously difficult injury record, would he throw him in for this particular one? I don't know, but you'd imagine. But you'd think, with this obviously being such a crucial game, he probably would. So that's what I expect. Anyway, obviously do a video after the game, reviewing it. Let's hope that Spurs can see the job through. It's obviously going to be a tricky game, but they've got a 2-goal advantage, and that is a huge boost. And I think it's being sort of slightly underplayed by some fans, probably just trying to sort of safeguard themselves from if it does go all wrong for their team. But in reality, when you look at it, having a 2-goal advantage going into this game is massive for Tottenham, and they should be able to see the job through. Anyway, cheers guys.